I never met the woman in this story. At least not personally. But a few years ago, I heard her account from someone who knew her well, and ever since then, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. Her name isn't important. What matters is where she ended up, and what she found there. By the time she was 35, she had accomplished almost everything people spend their entire lives chasing. She owned a successful marketing agency in Manhattan. She lived in a luxury apartment overlooking the city. Money wasn't a concern. Connections weren't a concern. Neither was status. She had all of it. The funny thing was, she came from absolutely nothing. A tiny farming community in rural Idaho. Her parents worked harder than anyone she had ever known. Every day was a struggle. Every dollar mattered. Every winter brought uncertainty. As a child, she hated it. She hated being poor. She hated wearing hand-me-down clothes. She hated hearing other kids joke about where she lived. And if she was being honest, she hated that her parents seemed willing to work endlessly instead of finding some smarter way to get ahead. She was popular in school, sharp, ambitious. The kind of person who always knew exactly what to say, exactly how to win, exactly how to position herself. While her parents spent their lives working fields and fixing equipment, she learned how people worked. Eventually, she became very good at influencing them. So she left. And for a long time, she never looked back. Then her mother died. Her father had passed years earlier. Now her mother was gone too. Suddenly, there was nobody left. No siblings. No children. No family bloodline that continued beyond her. The men she dated were successful, but they played the same game she did. Everybody was negotiating. Everybody was calculating. Nobody was loyal. Not really. For the first time in her life, she felt tired. Not sad. Not broken. Just tired. A friend suggested something unusual. The Appalachian Trail. A place where people went to disappear for a while. A place where silence still existed. A place that felt older than modern life. She wasn't looking for healing. She wasn't looking for answers. She wasn't looking to move on. She knew how to do those things. What she wanted was peace. Just once. Just for a little while. So she went. The first 2 days were uneventful. Long hikes, cool mornings, the smell of pine and damp earth, birdsong echoing through the ridges. Honestly, it was exactly what she had hoped for. Then came the 3rd day. She left camp to explore a side trail. Nothing dramatic, just curiosity. An hour passed. Then 2. Then 3. Eventually, she realized she was lost. At first, she wasn't worried. She remembered what her therapist had taught her. Slow breathing, grounding exercises, stay present, stay calm. She repeated them over and over. At first they worked. Then they didn't. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Every ridge looked identical. Every turn felt familiar. As afternoon faded into evening, panic began creeping in. Her water was running low. The temperature was dropping. Her phone had no signal. And the woods felt impossibly large. By nightfall, she was convinced she had been walking in circles for hours. The fear became physical. Her hands trembled. Her thoughts raced. Her breathing became shallow. She tried every technique she knew. Nothing worked. Eventually, she sat against a tree and cried. Not because she thought she would die, because she realized she had no control. And that terrified her more than anything. For her entire life, she had been in control. Now she wasn't. Sometime during the night, she began seeing things. At least that's what she believed. A figure standing between trees. Far away. Watching. When she blinked, it disappeared. Then she saw it again. Closer. This time she recognized him immediately. A man from her childhood. Everyone in town knew him. Nobody knew exactly where he lived. He wandered roads and fields. People fed him. People checked on him. People looked after him. Most people believed he was mentally disabled. As a child, she couldn't stand him. To her, he represented everything she wanted to escape. Poverty, failure, dependence, a life with no future. Whenever she saw him, she felt disgust. Now he was standing in the Appalachian wilderness, watching her. He didn't speak. He simply extended his hand. She stared at him, confused, terrified, certain she was hallucinating. But she was exhausted, desperate, completely out of options. Finally, she reached out and took his hand. The moment she did, the forest changed. Not dramatically. Nothing exploded into light. Nothing supernatural appeared. The air simply became still. Warm, peaceful. The panic vanished. The man turned and began walking. She followed. They moved through darkness for what felt like hours, though later she would swear it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. Eventually, they entered a clearing. Moonlight illuminated the entire place. Soft silver light covered the ground. At the center stood two familiar figures. Her parents, her mother and father, exactly as she remembered them. For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Then her mother smiled, and every year between them seemed to disappear. They talked, for what felt like forever. Her parents told her how proud they were, how amazed they were by everything she had accomplished, how she had built a life they never could have imagined. Then something unexpected happened. They apologized. They apologized for the poverty, for the struggles, for the ridicule she endured growing up, for all the things they couldn't provide, for every hardship she carried because of their circumstances. For the first time in her life, she saw them differently, not as people who lacked ambition, not as people who failed, but as two exhausted human beings who carried impossible burdens because they loved their daughter. Then she spoke. She told them how strong they were, how they kept going when most people would have given up, how they taught her resilience without ever intending to. She told them she admired them, more than she had ever admitted. Then she began crying, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep. She apologized too, for leaving, for being distant, for treating success like it mattered more than people, for making them lonely, and most of all, for not being there at the end, for not making time, for not saying goodbye. Her mother simply smiled, the same smile she remembered from childhood. Then the old man appeared beside her, the man she had spent years judging, the man she had considered worthless. For the first time, she truly looked at him. There was no bitterness in him, no resentment, no anger, only peace. He looked toward the darkness beyond the clearing. Then he looked back at her. "It's time." Those were the only words he spoke. The world faded. Everything went black. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on the ground beside the Appalachian Trail. Morning sunlight filtered through the trees. Her clothes were soaked with sweat. Every muscle in her body ached. For several moments, she simply stared upward, trying to understand what had happened. Then she noticed something strange. A handprint, pressed into the dirt and moisture on her leg, as though someone had grabbed her there only moments before. She stood up and looked around. The trail was only a few yards away. Without hesitation, she followed it. Back to camp, back to her car, back to the world she understood. The entire drive home, she replayed the experience again and again. Maybe it was dehydration. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was a dream. She honestly didn't know. What she did know was that something had changed. Not her success, not her wealth, not her career. Something deeper. The constant pressure she carried seemed gone. The need to win seemed smaller. The loneliness seemed quieter. For the first time in years, she felt still. And maybe that's what she had been searching for all along. Not happiness, not achievement, not validation. Peace, real peace. The kind that doesn't come from what you've built, but from understanding where you came from. And finally making peace with the people who helped you get there. Whatever happened in those Appalachian woods, she never forgot it. And according to those who knew her, she never feared being alone again.
I don't usually tell this story because, honestly, I still don't know what happened that night. This was about 7 years ago. I had just gone through a rough breakup, not the kind where you're angry, worse. The kind where you keep checking your phone, looking at old photos, wondering where things went wrong. Every time I opened social media, it felt like everyone else was living a perfect life. Perfect relationships, perfect vacations, perfect smiles. Meanwhile, I was barely sleeping. So one Friday afternoon, I threw a sleeping bag and some supplies into my truck and headed into the mountains of Appalachia. No destination. I just wanted quiet, real quiet. I found an old Forest Service road that wound through a remote stretch of mountains. There were no houses for miles. No cell service, just ridges covered in hardwood trees and little hollows disappearing into the distance. Honestly, it was exactly what I needed. The first day was peaceful. I hiked, cooked over a small fire, and watched the sunset paint the mountains orange. That night, though, something happened. Around midnight, I woke up suddenly. You know how sometimes you wake up and immediately know something is wrong? That's how it felt. I sat up in my tent and listened. Nothing. No wind. No insects. No owls. The woods were completely silent. And if you've spent time in the mountains, you know that's unusual. There are always sounds. I remember thinking, that's weird. Then I saw a light. Not bright. Just a faint yellow glow moving through the trees. At first I assumed it was another camper. But the nearest campground was over 20 miles away. The light drifted between the trunks, disappearing and reappearing. Slowly, almost like someone carrying an old lantern. I watched it for maybe a minute before it vanished. Just gone. No footsteps. No voices. Nothing. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Lack of sleep. Stress. Whatever. I spent the day exploring farther into the forest. Around late afternoon, I found something strange. There was an old path. Not on any map. Not maintained. Just a narrow trail cutting through rhododendron thickets. Now, normally, I would have ignored it. But something about it felt intentional. Like people had used it once and then simply stopped. So I followed it. The trail wound downhill into a deep hollow where the air felt noticeably cooler. I know how that sounds, but it really did. The temperature dropped enough that I put on a jacket. Eventually, I came to a clearing. In the center stood a single enormous oak tree. It was easily the biggest tree I'd ever seen. The trunk was twisted and covered in moss, and hanging from one branch was an old, rusted lantern. My stomach dropped, because it looked exactly like the light I'd seen the night before. I remember standing there thinking, okay, that's odd. Then I noticed something even stranger. The lantern wasn't connected to anything. No fuel. No candle. Nothing. Yet it was warm. Not hot. Just warm. Like someone had been holding it. I know how crazy that sounds. Trust me. I've replayed it in my head 1,000 times. Anyway, I started backing away. And that's when I heard footsteps. Slow footsteps. Crunch. 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 Coming from the trees behind me. I called out. Hello. No answer. The footsteps stopped. I waited. Nothing. Then I heard them again. Except this time, they were circling me. Not approaching. Just moving around the clearing. Always staying hidden. My heart was pounding. I kept turning, trying to see who was there. Nobody. At least nobody visible. Then came the weirdest part. I heard a voice. Not loud. Just above a whisper. It sounded like an older man. He said, "You can stop carrying it now." I froze, because I hadn't told anyone why I was there. Not a single person. Yet somehow that sentence felt directed at me. Like whoever, or whatever, spoke knew exactly what I'd been dealing with. The breakup, the loneliness, the resentment, all of it. I turned toward the voice. Nobody. Just trees. The clearing had become completely still. Then the lantern lit itself. Just for a second. A soft golden glow. And I swear, for that brief moment, the entire hollow looked different. Brighter somehow. Not physically brighter. I don't know how to explain it. It felt brighter. Peaceful. Like every bit of anxiety I'd carried for months had suddenly been lifted. Then the light went out. The footsteps stopped. And everything returned to normal. I stood there for another minute before deciding I had absolutely no interest in staying. I hiked back to camp faster than I've ever hiked in my life. The next morning, I packed up and drove home. For weeks afterward, I tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe somebody had been playing a prank. Maybe stress had gotten to me. Maybe I was imagining things. But here's where it gets strange. From that point on, my life began changing. Not overnight. Not like winning the lottery. Just steadily. A better job opportunity appeared unexpectedly. Then another. I met the woman who would eventually become my wife. We bought a home. Had children. My health improved. My friendships improved. Even financially, things seemed to work out in ways they never had before. Whenever obstacles appeared, somehow a path opened. It's difficult to explain. Life wasn't perfect. Nobody's is. But there seemed to be a current carrying me forward instead of pulling me under. Years later, I returned to that same forest. I spent 2 days searching for the trail. I never found it. Not the clearing. Not the giant oak. Not the lantern. Nothing. It was as if the place had never existed. And maybe it didn't. Maybe there are perfectly reasonable explanations for everything I experienced. I genuinely don't know. What I do know is that I went into those mountains feeling broken. I encountered something I still can't explain. And I left feeling lighter than I had in years. Since then, I've been blessed with a wonderful family, meaningful work, good health, and a happiness I once thought I'd lost forever. Maybe it was a strange coincidence. Maybe it was something psychological. Or maybe, somewhere deep in those old Appalachian mountains, there are still places that don't fit neatly into our understanding of the world. And every now and then, when someone is carrying a burden that's become too heavy, those places decide to help.